The flashing red and blue lights pulsed against my locked gate, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as two officers stepped out of their cruiser. My neighbor Karen was already in full performance mode, arms flailing as she demanded justice for what she claimed was a community emergency. I knew how this was going to play out before the first word even left their mouths. She had done this before, but this time, something about it felt different, more desperate. "Sir," the older officer, his badge reading Sergeant Doyle, called out as he approached. "We received a report about an unauthorized obstruction on what might be a public access road." I exhaled, rubbing my temple. "It's not a public road. It's my driveway. Private property. I have every right to close it off." Karen scoffed, her voice dripping with indignation. "That's not true. This road has always been open. People use it all the time. You can't just block it off." I shot back. "People use it because they don't respect property lines. That doesn't make it theirs." That made her even angrier. The younger officer, his tag reading Rivera, glanced at the thick folder of documents on my patio table. "Mr. Bishop, do you have proof of ownership?" I picked up the deed and held it out. "Right here. This driveway has been private property since the house was built. Nothing's changed except that I finally got tired of people treating it like a public road." Doyle took the papers, skimming them. "Then why all the fuss now?" Karen crossed her arms, her face turning an impressive shade of red. "Because he blocked off something people have been using for years. What if there's an emergency? What if services need to get through?" I pointed at the street. "There's a public road right there, Karen. This isn't the only way in or out of the neighborhood." Doyle sighed, handing my documents back. "Legally, he's right. If it's private property, he has the right to restrict access." Karen's mouth fell open. "What? Are you serious?" "This isn't over." Rivera still looked skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, why now? Why close it all of a sudden?" I hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? Because for years I had tolerated people cutting through my driveway like it was a shortcut. But a week ago, everything changed. I had been digging near the far end of my property, thinking about expanding my workshop, when my shovel hit something solid. Concrete. But not just any concrete. Smooth, reinforced, deep. Curious, I dug further and uncovered what looked like the edge of a sealed tunnel buried beneath decades of dirt and neglect. And the moment I found it, things started happening. That night, my security cameras caught something strange. Two men in dark clothing walking along my driveway. They weren't neighbors. They weren't police. They stopped exactly where I had been digging, stood there for a moment, then left. The next morning, I found my fence tampered with. The lock, which I had installed myself, had been clipped and hastily replaced with another, but I hadn't done it. I reviewed the footage again, rewinding the tape, watching frame by frame. At 3:27 a.m., two figures emerged from the shadows, one holding bolt cutters, the other crouched low, pressing his hands against the dirt where I had been digging, as if searching for something. Then, as silently as they appeared, they left. Later that day, I overheard Karen talking to another neighbor, her voice hushed but urgent. She wasn't just mad about the driveway anymore. She sounded scared. I watched her from my porch, noting the way she kept glancing at my house, at the spot where I had been digging. Did she know something I didn't? I didn't tell Karen any of that. Instead, I shrugged. I was tired of people trespassing. Thought it was time to set some boundaries. Doyle studied me carefully but said nothing. Rivera, however, wasn't convinced. "Mind if we take a look at where you closed it off?" I gestured toward the gate. "Be my guest." The two officers walked over, inspecting the heavy-duty steel barrier. It was new, freshly installed last week, solid enough to keep out anything short of a battering ram. Karen hissed, her voice sharp with accusation. "He's hiding something. Why else would he suddenly block the driveway?" I turned to her, lowering my voice. "Karen, I built this gate because I don't want people on my property anymore, and you have no right to tell me otherwise." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty, fear, or something else. Then, as if on cue, a black SUV rolled past the street, slowing slightly as it neared my house. It didn't stop. It didn't even linger for more than a second. But I saw it. and I saw the way Rivera's jaw tightened as he caught sight of it too. That night, after the police left and Karen stormed back into her house, I sat in my workshop reviewing the security footage once more. The SUV had circled my block 3 times, once at 9 p.m., again at midnight, and finally at dawn. I didn't recognize the plates, but something told me I wasn't supposed to. As I stared at the screen, the back of my neck prickled. I had spent the past week trying to convince myself this was just paranoia, that I had imagined the figures in the night, the clipped lock, the strange unease in Karen's eyes. But watching that SUV creep past my house again and again, I knew the truth. Something was going on, and somehow I had just placed myself right in the middle of it. The sound of the SUV's engine faded, but the tension in my chest didn't ease. I stayed at my desk, staring at the security footage, my fingers tapping absent-mindedly against the armrest of my chair. 3 times in one night. That wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was watching me, and they weren't trying very hard to hide it. I exhaled slowly, shutting off the screen before my paranoia got the best of me. I needed sleep, but my gut told me this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to a sharp knocking on my front door. My pulse jumped before I even opened my eyes. I rolled out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt, and made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I spotted Rivera standing on my porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Not exactly the wake-up call I wanted. I opened the door just enough to see him. "Officer, something I can help you with?" Rivera didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the driveway, then back at me. "Can we talk inside?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't waste time, striding into my living room like he already knew the layout. I shut the door, watching as he turned back to me, lowering his voice. "I need you to tell me exactly what you found." My muscles tensed. "You saw the paperwork. It's my property. What I do with it is my business." Rivera sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Look, I know what the law says, but I also know you're not telling me everything. And after last night, I need to know if you're in danger." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean, after last night?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, swiping through the screen before holding it up for me to see. It was a grainy image from his dash cam, taken sometime during the night. The black SUV parked 2 blocks from my house. The timestamp read 4:17 a.m. My jaw tightened. "You followed them." Rivera shook his head. "I was patrolling near the neighborhood and caught it on my camera. Thought it was odd, so I ran the plates. No registration. It's not in any database." A chill ran through me. "So whoever's in that car isn't just some nosy neighbor?" Rivera nodded. "That's why I need you to tell me exactly what's going on. What did you find under that driveway?" I swallowed hard, debating how much to say. I could lie, pretend it was nothing, but I knew that wasn't going to help me. I walked over to the patio door and pulled back the curtain, pointing toward the far end of my property. "It's not just a driveway. There's something underneath it, some kind of structure. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's old and it was sealed off intentionally." Rivera followed my gaze, his expression unreadable. "And you uncovered it. Part of it, enough to know it wasn't meant to be found." Rivera exhaled slowly. "I need to see it." I tensed. "That's not a good idea." "And why is that?" "Because someone else doesn't want it to be seen," I said, lowering my voice. "And they're watching." For the first time, Rivera looked genuinely unsettled. He glanced toward the window, his hand instinctively brushing against his holster. "You think whoever was in that SUV knows what you found?" "I don't think. I know." Rivera was silent for a moment, then took a deep breath, nodding once. "Then we need to move fast. Show me now." I hesitated. Letting him see meant bringing him into this mess. But keeping it to myself meant I was facing it alone. And if last night was any indication, that wasn't going to be an option for much longer. "All right," I finally said. "But if we do this, we do it my way. No backup, no radio calls, just us." Rivera's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Lead the way." As we stepped outside, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. Whoever was watching wasn't done yet, and neither was I. I led Rivera toward the back of the property, each step careful, measured. The early morning air was still, unnaturally quiet. Even the birds seemed to be avoiding this part of my land. I crouched down near the disturbed dirt where I had started digging days ago, pulling back the tarp I had laid over the site. Beneath it, the smooth concrete surface gleamed slightly under the weak sunlight, untouched by time. Rivera knelt beside it, running his fingers along the seam. This isn't normal. You're right, I murmured. And that's the problem. He pressed his palm against the surface, frowning. It's cold, and not just from being underground. This thing is insulated, reinforced. My stomach tightened. Then it's not just an old bunker. Rivera stood abruptly, scanning the tree line, his jaw clenched. I don't like this. Someone built this for a reason, and they didn't expect anyone to find it. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. You think it's military? Could be, or something else. Either way, you shouldn't be anywhere near it. I stared at him, incredulous. Now you sound like the guys in that SUV. Just forget about it, right? Walk away? Rivera held my gaze, but there was something in his eyes now. Something that hadn't been there before. Fear. I'm saying you might not have a choice. I didn't like the way Rivera said that, the way his voice lowered just enough to make it feel more like a warning than a statement. I exhaled, my breath visible in the cool morning air. If I wasn't supposed to have a choice, I muttered, then someone's going to try to make sure I don't. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, making every movement feel heavier. Rivera stepped back from the uncovered concrete, shaking his head. This isn't just some abandoned structure. The way it's sealed, the way it's built, this was never meant to be found. I crouched down again, running my hand along the surface. The material was different than I had expected. It wasn't just reinforced concrete. There was metal beneath it, something dense and cold. I looked up at him. Someone knew it was here. Maybe they even expected me to find it. Rivera's jaw tightened. If that's the case, then you've got a much bigger problem. I heard the low hum of an engine before I saw the vehicle. My stomach twisted as I turned toward the street. Another black SUV. Not the same one from the night before, but close enough that it didn't matter. It rolled past my house slowly, deliberately, as if whoever was inside wanted to make sure I saw them. Rivera tensed beside me, his hand brushing his holster. This isn't good. No kidding, I muttered. The SUV didn't stop. It just kept going, disappearing around the bend. But I knew better than to think that meant I was in the clear. I turned back to Rivera. Tell me you got a plate this time. He pulled out his phone, checking his dash cam feed. It was blurry, but still legible. He muttered the numbers under his breath, then froze. What is it? I asked, watching the color drain from his face. It's registered to a government fleet, but there's no department listed. No agency. Just a blank record. My chest tightened. So whoever they are, they don't want to be found. Rivera put his phone away, exhaling slowly. If they know we're looking, they'll escalate. You need to be careful. I stared at the concrete slab, my gut screaming at me that I was already in too deep. What do you think is down there? Rivera didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with something almost like pity. I don't know, but I don't think you're ready to find out. I stood up, dusting off my hands. Ready or not, I don't think I have a choice anymore. If they wanted to keep this a secret, they shouldn't have made it so obvious. Rivera shook his head. You don't get it. They don't care if you know. They care if you talk. And if they think you might be a problem, they won't hesitate to make you disappear. My jaw tightened. Then I guess I need to find out the truth before they get the chance. Rivera looked toward the road again, then back at me. If we do this, we do it right. No mistakes, no reckless digging. We figure out what we're dealing with first. I nodded, my pulse pounding. Then let's start figuring it out. The tension in the air grew thicker as we stood there, staring at the sealed slab of concrete. It was as though the world around us had fallen silent, waiting for someone to make a move. The black SUV was still out there, somewhere circling like a predator, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. No one else seemed to be close enough to help, and I wasn't sure I could trust anyone outside of the small group gathered around the opening in my driveway. We need to go, Rivera said, his voice quiet but firm. I turned and nodded. Yeah, I know. With one last glance toward the distant street, where the SUV had vanished around the bend, I gestured for Rivera to follow. Karen hovered behind us, her body language nervous, and for the first time, I saw the uncertainty on her face. Her usual bravado was gone, replaced by fear. I could tell she wasn't used to being caught up in something like this. She wasn't ready for whatever this was. The ground felt unusually cold underfoot as we made our way toward the section of the property where I had uncovered the tunnel entrance. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees around us, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, like something was waiting just out of sight. I crouched down by the edge of the tarp, feeling the weight of everything that had happened so far pressing on my shoulders. The metal crowbar felt heavy in my hand as I carefully wedged it between the seams of the concrete, testing for any give. My heart raced, each breath coming in short, shallow bursts. This wasn't just about the driveway anymore. Whatever was buried here, whoever was watching, it was bigger than us. Rivera knelt beside me, his gaze scanning the area around us, still alert, like a predator waiting for a signal. You ready for this? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Doesn't matter if I'm ready, I said, my fingers tightening around the crowbar. It's happening whether we want it to or not. I glanced at Karen as she stepped closer, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting between us and the street beyond. This isn't a good idea, she muttered. We shouldn't be doing this. You don't know who might be watching. You don't know what you're messing with. I ignored her for the moment, too focused on the task at hand. Rivera shifted beside me, adjusting his stance. On three, I said. 1, 2. We heaved the crowbar into the gap. The slab of concrete groaned in protest, resisting at first. But after another forceful pull, the ground shifted and the concrete cracked open, just enough to give us a glimpse of what lay beneath. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out of the gap, making my skin crawl. It wasn't just the smell of dirt and decay. No, this was something older, something that had been buried long enough to lose its relevance to the world above. Something that shouldn't have been disturbed. Karen stepped back quickly, her hand over her mouth as the smell hit her. This is insane, she said, her voice trembling. What the hell is down there? Rivera wiped his forehead, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness. I don't know, but whatever it is, we need to find out. I took a deep breath, summoning the last bit of courage I had left. Let's go. We pried the slab open further, revealing a narrow metal ladder leading straight down into the darkness. The air smelled like it hadn't been disturbed in years, like dust, rust, and something else I couldn't quite place. The hollow feeling in my stomach deepened. Karen's voice trembled. I'm not going down there. I didn't blame her. No one in their right mind would want to go down there, but if I didn't go, I would never know what I was up against. I turned to Rivera. You first. Rivera looked at me like I had just asked him to walk into a lion's den. You're out of your mind, he muttered, but I'm not letting you go down there alone. Someone needs to stay above ground and keep watch, I said, meeting his gaze. If we're not back in an hour, you go for backup. Rivera nodded once, his hand brushing against the holster at his waist. His fingers were tight around the flashlight he pulled from his belt. He didn't hesitate further. With a heavy sigh, he started his descent, the creaking of the ladder beneath his weight echoing in the silence. I followed close behind, the smell growing thicker as we went deeper. Karen's nervous shuffling was the only sound behind us as we made our way down. The beam of Rivera's flashlight cutting through the murky air. The walls of the shaft were smooth and metallic, coated with a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The dim light from the flashlight barely illuminated the passage, stretching out into the dark like a tunnel that had been forgotten by the world above. We reached the bottom with no incident, but the heavy sense of dread in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. The floor was hard, industrial-grade concrete, the kind you would expect in a place built to withstand anything. The whole place felt like it was built to last forever, something meant to hide from the world, to be forgotten. Welcome to the past, Rivera muttered under his breath. I glanced around. The passage was long, stretching into the distance, the light from the flashlight barely revealing the outlines of doors and sealed-off areas. There was something mechanical about the air, a faint hum in the background that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "This isn't just an old bunker," I whispered, my heart racing. Rivera turned to me, his flashlight shining into the darkness ahead. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's something else." We moved forward cautiously, my mind racing with possibilities. Why had it been sealed? Who had built this? And more importantly, who had been so desperate to keep it hidden? The distant sound of a door creaking open echoed through the corridor. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an accident. Someone or something was down here with us. We paused. Rivera's hand instinctively brushed against his holster, his body tensing. I felt the weight of the moment press down on me like a vice. Whatever was down here, we were about to face it, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what we were going to find. "Stay close," Rivera muttered, his voice low. "We need to keep moving. Whatever's down here, it's not just abandoned." We moved further down the corridor, the darkness enveloping us as we ventured deeper into the unknown. Every step I took felt like it was leading me into a past that didn't want to be remembered, and I wasn't sure how we were going to get out of it once we found the truth. The air was thick with dust, and the hum of machinery reverberated faintly through the walls, adding to the growing sense of unease that seemed to suffocate the narrow corridor we moved through. The low buzz of equipment was the only sound besides our footsteps, yet it felt like there was something lurking just out of sight, something far beyond what we could comprehend. "Keep your eyes open," Rivera muttered, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "We don't know what we're dealing with down here." I nodded, my own flashlight flickering over the corridor ahead. The walls, made of smooth metal, bore a cold industrial quality. There were no windows, no signs of life, just blank, sealed-off doors, and the strange, unsettling sense of being watched, even though there was no one in sight. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the place was pressing down on us, urging us to turn back. We came to a corner where the corridor split into two directions. One path led further into the depths of the facility, while the other veered sharply left. Rivera gestured toward the left, a silent command to check it out. We cautiously made our way down the side passage, the dim light barely illuminating what appeared to be a control room. The door, a heavy steel structure, was slightly ajar, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached. Rivera, sensing my unease, gently pushed the door open with the barrel of his flashlight. The beam of light hit the room's interior, revealing a strange and unsettling sight. The control room was filled with rows of outdated computer terminals, all lined up neatly against the walls. Thick cables snaked along the floor, connecting everything in a maze of wires and circuits. The air smelled stale and old, as if the equipment hadn't been touched in years. Yet it was eerily intact. There was a desk in the center of the room, papers scattered across it, most of them covered in a fine layer of dust. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice low. Rivera didn't answer immediately. He was too busy scanning the room with his flashlight, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "I don't know, but it's not good," he muttered. I stepped into the room, my footsteps soft against the concrete floor. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something strange. The room was surprisingly well preserved for its apparent age. The machine seemed untouched, but there was something off about it. The old static-covered screens flickered intermittently, showing flashes of information that didn't make sense. Most of the paper scattered around the desk was illegible, the ink smudged beyond recognition. But one document caught my eye. I picked it up carefully, brushing the dust from its surface. It was a faded map, showing some sort of underground network. Lines crisscrossed the map, marking locations, but the names and labels were written in Cyrillic, a language I didn't understand. My stomach twisted as I examined it. It looked like a blueprint, but for what? And why was it hidden beneath my driveway? Rivera was already on the other side of the room, inspecting another control panel. He wiped grime from the surface, revealing an old logo barely visible beneath layers of dust and dirt. His breath caught as he stared at it. "That's not American," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "It's Soviet." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt the weight of them sink into my chest. "Soviet?" I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. What the hell is a Soviet control room doing under my property? I don't know, Rivera muttered, stepping closer to the console. But it's still powered on. The equipment's old, but it's functional. I took another look at the map, my mind racing. If this was Soviet-era equipment, that meant this place had been buried for decades, hidden away from the world for a reason, and that reason was now right beneath my feet. Karen, who had followed us into the room, let out a sharp breath. What are we dealing with here? This, this can't be real. I turned to her, my heart pounding. This is real, and I don't think we're the only ones who know about it. Rivera didn't take his eyes off the control panel. He reached out and touched a few buttons on the console. The screen flickered again, and for a brief moment, the static cleared, revealing a series of coordinates. A string of numbers followed by a set of dates. I stepped closer, trying to read the display. What's that? It looks like a log, Rivera said, frowning. Coordinates, dates, and a timestamp. This was being used up until recently. My mind spun as I processed the information. Whoever had been here, whoever had been maintaining this place was still active, and they didn't want us to find it. Suddenly there was a noise, a distant clang, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, echoing from somewhere deeper within the complex. It was too late to turn back now. We had come too far, and there was no easy way out. Rivera turned toward the door, his hand instinctively brushing his holster. We need to move, he said, his voice firm. Someone's coming. Karen's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. What are we going to do? We keep moving, Rivera answered. We need to figure out what's going on before we're caught. I nodded, my heart racing. Let's go. We need to find answers. Now. We moved quickly, retracing our steps through the dark corridor, the sound of footsteps growing nearer. The air felt heavier now, and I could almost feel the eyes of whoever was out there watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We reached the next door, a thick, reinforced barrier. I pushed against it, but it was locked, sealed tight. We can't stop here, I muttered. There's more to this. Rivera moved up to the door, pulling out his crowbar. We'll get through. We have to. But as he pried the door open, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Movement, a shadow, a figure. Someone was watching us, and they were getting closer. The door creaked open slowly, the steel groaning as it gave way to Rivera's crowbar. Each twist of the metal tool felt like the slow unraveling of a secret. As the door opened wider, the dim light from the hallway illuminated the next room, an even deeper part of the underground complex. I held my breath, watching the door inch open, praying it wouldn't make any more noise. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than anything else in the room. I could feel Karen behind me, her breathing shallow, her steps hesitant. She was as afraid as I was, though for different reasons. I wasn't sure what she had seen that night, when she had spoken of men in black suits, but I could feel the weight of her fear pressing in around me. Rivera stepped forward, pulling the door all the way open. He froze, his flashlight scanning the room ahead. A metal staircase descended into another narrow corridor. The air was thicker here, musty, like it hadn't been disturbed for decades. The walls were lined with faded signs, warnings written in languages I couldn't understand. I could barely make out a few words that looked like Russian, but most of the text was worn away by time. Without a word, Rivera motioned for me to follow. I hesitated for a moment, my eyes darting back toward the open door. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, gnawed at me. Every fiber of my body screamed that we weren't alone. As we descended the stairs, I could hear the faint hum of machinery again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. It wasn't just a noise, it was a pulse, rhythmic, like the beating of a heart. Something was alive down here, something that had been waiting for us to find it. The staircase ended in a small, circular room. There was no exit, no windows, just cold metal walls that seemed to close in around us. In the center of the room stood a large, heavy door, sealed with thick chains and a rusted lock. Something about it felt different. This wasn't just some old storage space. It was something more, something that had been intentionally shut away from the world above. I stepped closer, the metallic clang of my boots echoing off the walls. "What's behind this door?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the thick air. Rivera didn't answer immediately. He was studying the chains, the lock, and the faint outline of the doorframe. "It's sealed tight," he said, his voice grim. "But we're not going to find answers by standing here." I nodded, my mind racing. What if we opened it? What if this was the point of no return? I could already feel the weight of the situation pressing on me. If we crossed this threshold, there was no going back. Whatever was behind that door, it was meant to stay hidden. But we had come this far. I had to know. "We need to get in," I said, my voice stronger now, more determined. Rivera didn't hesitate. He pulled out a small, heavy-duty tool from his belt, the sharp edge glinting in the faint light. It wasn't the most sophisticated tool, but it was enough to break through the rusted chains. The sound of the metal scraping against metal was deafening in the silence. Each twist of the tool brought us closer to the truth. I could feel the weight of the moment we had all been waiting for. As Rivera managed to break the lock, the chains fell away with a loud thud. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark space behind it. A faint, flickering light illuminated the edges of the room beyond, casting long shadows across the floor. The air inside smelled stale, but there was something else there too, a metallic, almost antiseptic smell, like something that hadn't been disturbed in years. We stepped inside, our footsteps careful, quiet. The room was far larger than I had expected. Rows upon rows of strange equipment lined the walls. Machines, consoles, and monitors, all of it dark, lifeless, as if time had forgotten this place. But then I noticed something. In the far corner of the room, a single computer terminal flickered weakly, its screen buzzing with static before displaying an image. I moved closer, my pulse quickening. The screen cleared, revealing a set of coordinates. Alongside them were more numbers, dates, times, something that looked like a log. I reached out to touch the screen, but before I could, Rivera's hand stopped me. "Wait," he said quietly. "There's something wrong here." I looked up at him, confusion clouding my mind. "What do you mean?" He stepped forward, his flashlight illuminating the darkened room. "This wasn't meant to be found. Look around. The equipment, it's still operational, but it's not supposed to be. It's old, too old, and these logs, they don't make sense." I glanced back at the screen, my eyes scanning the numbers, the coordinates. "What do you think it means?" Rivera shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't know, but I've been doing this long enough to know when something isn't right. This isn't just an old Soviet facility. This place was active recently. Someone's been here." A cold wave of fear washed over me. "So they know we're here?" "I'm not sure," Rivera said, his eyes scanning the room. "But we can't stay here much longer. We need to get out." Suddenly I heard it, a sound from the hallway. Footsteps, slow, measured, the unmistakable sound of boots on metal. I froze. "They know we're here," Rivera whispered. My heart raced in my chest. I could feel the sweat gathering at the back of my neck. We weren't alone anymore. A door creaked open behind us, and I spun around to see two figures standing in the doorway. They were dressed in black, their faces hidden by masks. They moved quickly, efficiently, like soldiers. "Get down!" Rivera shouted, but it was too late. One of the figures pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at us. The world seemed to freeze for a moment, the sound of the footsteps fading into the background. My mind raced. There was no way out. Not this time. "Hands up!" one of the figures barked. I raised my hands, my mind still spinning, but there was no fear. Not yet. I had come too far. I wasn't going to let them stop me now. Rivera's voice was calm, controlled. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, his gaze shifting from me to the screen. "We're not here to answer questions," he said, his tone cold. "We're here to stop you." I swallowed hard. "From what?" He smiled, a chilling, empty smile. "From digging too deep." I realized then that this was it. Whatever secret had been buried here, whatever had been hidden beneath the concrete, was far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. And now we were stuck right in the middle of it. The figure raised his gun again, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. But we hadn't come this far to be stopped. We hadn't uncovered this much just to turn back. There was something beneath this place, something that needed to be exposed, and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. The barrel of the gun stared me down, cold and unyielding. The faint hum of machinery in the background now drowned out by the pounding of my heart. The figure in front of me took another step closer, his eyes hidden behind the mask, but his body language spoke volumes. He was calm, controlled, almost certain of what he was about to do. "Hands up!" the figure barked again, this time with more authority, and I complied, raising my hand slowly. Rivera did the same, his eyes never leaving the masked figure, calculating, weighing his options. "Stop right there," I said, my voice steady despite the fear crawling under my skin. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but this has gone far enough. We're not backing down now. You've already gone to great lengths to keep this place hidden, but we're not leaving until we get answers." The figure hesitated, then tilted his head slightly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice muffled by the mask but still clear. "You were never meant to find this. What's down here is bigger than you, bigger than all of us." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "Then why let me get this far? Why let us uncover it?" His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something behind the mask, an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Because now it's too late. You've already dug too deep, and that's something we can't let you leave with." Before I could respond, another figure appeared behind him, a second masked individual stepping out of the shadows. The two exchanged a brief glance before the first one raised his hand, signaling for the other to move. I braced myself for whatever was coming next, my thoughts racing, wondering if this was the end of it all. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures stepped back. The one who had spoken earlier gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, and the two of them retreated without another word. My hands slowly dropped as the tension in the room lifted, but the unease still lingered. "What the hell just happened?" I whispered, my breath shaky. Rivera was still on edge, his body tense. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Now!" I nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened crash down on me. We had come looking for answers, but all we had found was more questions. Whatever was buried beneath this facility, it wasn't meant for us to discover. And yet, we had uncovered it, and we were still alive. I turned toward the door, but before we could leave, I paused. My gaze shifted back to the screen that had first shown us the coordinates, the map, the log. The data was still there, flickering weakly. Rivera saw where I was looking. "Don't! They'll come for us if we don't leave now." I knew he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was hidden here was far too important to let go. We couldn't just walk away from it. I reached for the mouse and clicked the print screen button, saving the coordinates, the images, the log file. "We need to make sure someone else knows about this," I said, my voice hardening. "We might not have answers now, but we'll find them, and we're not doing it alone." Rivera didn't argue. He nodded once, stepping back as I finished saving the information. "All right, let's get out of here." As we made our way back through the corridors, the footsteps, the shadows, everything still felt like it was closing in on us. But there was something different in my mind now, a sense of purpose, a drive to keep going, to find the truth no matter the cost. We reached the surface and the safety of daylight, the sounds of the world around us feeling like a relief after the suffocating silence below ground. We had made it out, but I knew that we weren't done. Lesson from the story of digging too deep, of uncovering something that was meant to remain buried, holds a powerful lesson about curiosity, the pursuit of truth, and the dangers of unintended consequences. Sometimes the search for answers can lead to places we aren't prepared for, and the discovery of the truth can be far more complicated and dangerous than we expect. But perhaps the most important lesson is that seeking knowledge, no matter how perilous the journey, can never be in vain. While we may not always understand the implications of what we uncover, it's the process of discovery that empowers us to make informed decisions, to act with intention, and to protect the truth. There's always a cost to uncovering secrets, but if we are brave enough to face them, we gain the ability to shape our own fate and the fate of those around us. In the end, the quest for truth doesn't end with one discovery or one confrontation. It's a path that demands courage, resilience, and the strength to continue, even when the answers are elusive or dangerous. We may not always be ready for the consequences, but our pursuit of what is hidden will determine the future, both for ourselves and the world around us. And sometimes the truth is the only thing worth fighting for.